Welcome everyone to this new webinar in AFRY Management Consulting series of webinars about the happenings in the European energy sector. And today's webinar is concerning the situation we observed over the last few months in the Nordic power market, with not only very low power prices in some areas, but also huge price differences between the different price zones. Next.
And all of a sudden it's not working. Let's see. There we go.
So before we start, the webinar is open for everyone to ask questions in writing during the presentation, and we'll cover as many of the questions as we can at the end of the webinar. And also the slide pack and recording will be emailed to all of you entities as soon as they're available. Next. So my name is Kjetil Ingberg. I'm a director and I'm heading AFRY Management Consulting in Norway, and also having responsibility for the consulting in the Nordic countries, including in Sweden and Finland. So today's two presenters are Kathrine Stene Bakke, Senior Principal in the Oslo office, and Geir Brønmo. And Kathrine, please introduce yourself.
I can do that. So yes, I am Kathrine Bakke. I am been working in the Nordic energy sector for about 25 years on a wide variety of issues, but mainly now in the renewable sector. And I'm also responsible for our Nordic and Baltic market, not market modeling, but market reports that some of you might know, the AIM reports for the Nordics and Baltics.
Yes, and my name is Geir Brønmo, and I am working together with Kathrine on the reports. My main responsibility on the report is on the modeling side. So when we go through the presentation, I will take care of modeling details. And otherwise, have been working with the energy transition related issues and much as a project manager as well for the last 8 to 10 years. And then I will give the word back to Kathrine to continue the presentation.
Right, thank you. And in order for me to not sort of start doing stupid things, believing I'm not on camera, I'm actually going to turn my camera off and you can all concentrate on the presentation. So we thought we would start today by doing a deep dive into the market events of 2020, and then also very briefly describe how we secure that we are able to capture those things that we've seen in the Nordics also in the future in our modeling. And then finally present some thoughts on how aspects of the Nordic system that we see will play out also in the future. So can this happen again? What are the sort of outlook for in the longer term for the long-term investment environment? And very briefly, sorry, it is just in case there are people online that are not very familiar with the Nordic power market, I thought I'd just very briefly mention a few things. So the Nordic system is hydro dominated. In an average year, about 55% of the generation is from hydro, and most of that is from reservoir hydro. It's closely interconnected internally between the four countries, and they rely on each other for security of supply. And as you can see from the link on the right-hand side, they are also closely interconnected to the continent. The black lines are existing interconnection, the dotted lines are interconnection under construction. And with that background covered, let's turn to events of this year. And 2020 has really been an extreme year for the Nordic electricity market, with a stream of headlines basically on sort of new firsts when it comes to prices, as you can see from some of the press clippings that we have here on this page. And it turns out that the NordPool system price has actually averaged below 10 euros per megawatt hour for the last 6 months. And prices are still low. At the moment, I think the system price is trading at around 13 euros per megawatt hour. And this raises, of course, the question then, is 2020 an example of the perfect storm, or is what we're looking at now actually the new normal for the Nordics? And in order to answer that, we need to understand, firstly, why have the prices been so low this year? Can the same thing happen again? And finally, are there things in the market, trends and developments that either increase the likelihood of 2020 repeating, or the consequences of sort of increased consequences of such events? But firstly, large price fluctuations and periods of low prices are not at all uncommon in the Nordics. The figure you see now show the Nordic system price in black or dark blue, plotted against the German market price for the last 20 or so years. And you can see that while they follow each other quite closely over time, there are some significant dips and peaks, so deviations, both on the upside and the downside. These dips and peaks tend to correlate quite closely with the weather, especially with wet and dry years. And what happens is that if we go into winter with really full reservoirs, if we go into the winter with less water than we would normally have in the system, and you then get a cold spell, you could really see prices peaking. And you can see, for instance, the winter of 2010 or the winter of 2012 with monthly prices at 70 and 80 euros are perfect examples of that. And similarly, if the reservoirs are really, really full, that would push prices down, and the summers of 2012 and the summer of 2015 was an example of that. It's also maybe interesting to see how fast we moved from the very dry winter of 2011 to the very wet summer of 2012. It shows that you can actually change out of these extreme situations quite quickly. So what is special about this year, I think, is that both the depth and the length of the dip that we are seeing. And clearly, COVID-19 plays some role in this. As you can see from the German price here, it's fallen quite dramatically, and that has contributed to pulling the Nordic price down. But the effect that COVID has had on Nordic electricity demand has been relatively small, smaller than we have seen in most of the other European markets. So this doesn't explain why we get this really big dip and why we haven't had the same sort of recovery as we see in the German price. And the explanation basically lies here in the reservoir levels, which is the amount of water that we have stored in the dams for production at a later time. And the figure on the left shows how reservoir levels change throughout the year. The gray band that you see here, that represents the range that we've seen over the last 20 years in reservoir levels. And the dotted lines show the average or the median for those 20 years. And as there is very little inflow during winter, reservoir levels tend to fall, and they will typically be at their lowest sometime in May, before the snow melt season in the early summer and before we get the autumn rain. And then the reservoir levels tend to be at their fullest at about this time of the year, before the heating season starts and consumption starts pulling levels down again. And in this graph, you can also see the very dry 2011, the very dry 2010, and also the wet 2011, 2012, and see how they actually sort of pushes the boundaries or pushes the edges of the historic band. And then the black line here is 2020. And you can see it started out quite normal, but a mild and wet January and early February meant that the reservoir levels sometime in late February were fuller than they had really been for more than 20 years. At the same time, there was record amounts of snow in the mountains surrounding the reservoirs. And you can actually, if you see the picture here, you can see some road workers trying to clear one of the mountain roads in the spring. These mountain roads tend to be closed over winter, and you can see the amount of snow that we're actually talking about. In February, hydro producers realized that if they were to have room for all of this snow when it melted, they would need to empty the reservoirs really quite fast. And that meant producing electricity even as prices kept falling. They didn't really have much choice. The alternative for them was worse. It would either be that at a later point, the reservoirs would be so full that they would have to spill the water without being able to produce, or even worse, that they would actually create flooding in populated areas below downstream of the plant. And you can actually see they managed to get the reservoir levels quite far down, but as snow melted, it came back on, came really fast up again. And we are actually now today at a reservoir level that is above the 20-year range that we have been talking about. So what this shows is that the weather in 2020 has been at the extreme end of what we would define as a normal range. So it is, in a way, testing the boundaries there. And of course, this is a very important reason for the low prices that we've seen. So far, we have talked about, sorry, going too fast. So far, we've talked about the Nordic system price, but this hides another aspect of the Nordic market that has become, I would say, more apparent this year, and that is the role of location. So the Nordic power market consists of 12 bidding zones, and you can see them in the picture to your right. And these zones are reflecting bottlenecks in the transmission system. And as a power producer, it's actually the price in the area that you are located within that is the price that you will get from your production, or vice versa. If you're a consumer, this is the price you pay. So this is actually the price you need to understand in order to assess the revenue stream or cost stream of your plant. And historically, I mean, these price areas are there for a reason. And historically, we've seen short-term deviations in prices between price areas. But on an annual level, the deviations have been very small, maybe a couple of euros, some years a bit more, but in general, quite small on an annual level. This is therefore another way that 2020 has been different and rather extreme. And if you look at the chart on the left, this is actually plotting all the area prices on a weekly basis through the year up to almost up to date anyway. And you can see that in some price areas, typically the hydro-dominated northern areas and Norway, and that's the green here, you can see really, really low prices. They've actually the lowest price been around sort of €0.50 for 10, 11, 12 weeks running. And at the same time, we've had other areas, typically in the demand centers further south in southern Sweden and Denmark, where prices have been really high in the area of 30, 25, 30, 40 in the same weeks. And this is partly a result, I would say, of a perfect storm. So while the Norwegian hydro plants were forced to produce at full speed, as we talked about, because of the snow melt, Norwegian export capacity has been temporarily reduced due to technical faults on the interconnection lines, both to Netherlands, Denmark, and Sweden. And these issues are about to or have been resolved. So we expect market balance in the southern part of Norway to be more normal going forward. This is where the cables land, and actually prices in this part of the region to tighten a bit. But 2020 also revealed the first sign of a more long-term bottleneck, the one between south and north of the region. I'm not sure if you can see me trying to point, but it would be going around here, about the dark green color in the Swedish map, and then through Norway, south of NO3. And with all the hydro that was available, and also with the new wind that we see in northern Sweden, the capacity in the transmission grid going from north to south has really been tested this year. And that is also one of the reasons, or the main reason, for the really large price deviations that we have been seeing. And the question is, of course, then, how will this play out as we go forward? Will these price deviations be alleviated in some way? And in order to say something sensible about that, you would need, you need deep market analysis and modeling, and you need an approach to doing that captures the complexity and also the weather dependency of the Nordic system. And this is where my colleague Geir comes in, and he will just briefly take you through a couple of slides to show you how we approach market modeling in the Nordics, and then I'll return afterwards with a sort of more long-term outlook, both for prices in general and area prices in particular. Geir, over to you.
Thank
you
you
have to
very
say
much.
Next.
So next, Kathrine, please. So I will take you a very short glimpse into our machine room, so to speak. So how do we produce these long-term projections for the Nordics? Actually, before starting with the Nordics, we need to have a look at the pan-European modeling that we are doing. Only one slide on that, I promise you. But this is a very important basis for the Nordic specific work that we are doing. And even before looking at the pan-European market, pan-European power market modeling, we are actually undertaking quite a large modeling exercise to determine the assumptions on the markets that are connected to the power markets. So that being mainly, of course, the commodity markets. So oil, coal, and gas is very important drivers for power prices all over Europe, and the carbon market, which has been very significant for a while and might be even more significant going forward. As an addition to that, we have a modeling of new demand. So that is maybe in the first phase, direct electrification of transport and heat and industry, but also in the future, further into the future, maybe indirect electrification. And all these markets affect the power market, but the power market also affects these markets. So, for instance, for the gas market, the amount of production of electricity from gas would then be a demand in our fundamental gas modeling. So these models, they interact, and this is updated. This chain of models is updated every quarter to produce very fresh price projections in our reports. And then going further into to the bid 3, that is kind of that's the main machine for producing our price projection, which is in which we do the pan-European modeling of the electricity system, and there we have every price area of the European system modeled at once and at an hourly resolution, and representing both the hourly demand, the hourly generation from various sources, and also the power interchange between the price areas. And this is important to model simultaneously to get a precise picture of how the prices and flows will be in a given configuration. So bid 3 is very accurate when you have the historical power plant park and demand. Bid 3 will produce very accurate power prices, and this has been tested time and time again. So what we do for the future is to take assumptions on, of course, from the other models, the commodity markets, but also on how the power plant park will evolve and how the demand will evolve, and given those assumptions, then bid 3 will calculate you a power price. And the pan-European modeling and the prices on the continent, and especially the countries that are close to the Nordics, will play an important role, as Kathrine already showed in the graph earlier. Will play a very important role in setting the base price for the Nordics. So maybe Kathrine, you could switch to the next. When we go into the Nordic specifics, we need to take into account how the hydro producers are bidding into the market, and this is quite different from how thermal power plant owners would bid into the market, where you have a typically heavily based on the short-run marginal cost of your plant would be how you bid into the market. But the short-run marginal cost of hydropower is 0, so you have to take into account the expectations of future precipitation, and also of course what the reservoir level is at the moment. So maybe it's a no-brainer at the moment that a hydro producer needs to bid very low in the market, since the reservoir level is very high. But on other reservoir levels, some sophisticated modeling would be necessary to give you some advice on how to bid into the market. And the state-of-the-art algorithm for the Nordics is using a stochastic dynamic programming algorithm to calculate water values as bidding prices for your hydropower. And this is also included in our bid 3 model, and this is what we use when we calculate our Nordic power price projections. And as Kathrine has already emphasized, weather is extremely important. It's important for the European power market, but for the Nordics it's even more important, and especially because of the hydro, which is the number 1, because the deviations from a wet year to a dry year is extremely high. So you need a long range of years to cover the full dynamics of the Nordic hydro system. So when we do our projections, we calculate prices based on 20 historical hydro years. And in addition to that, of course, the weather is important for the demand and the renewable production. And it's also important, of course, that all these aspects are correlated. And even correlation with the renewable production in the Nordics with the renewable production on the continent is important to get the dynamics of the system right. And all this is incorporated in our Nordic market modeling, where we have the hourly price projections from the continent as an input to the Nordic modeling. And yes, how we produce them, we typically use satellite data for our wind and solar wind speeds and solar irradiation, and we use reanalysis to convert it into a power generation series. Yes, sorry, Kathrine, just switch on to the next. No problem. And of course, as Kathrine already mentioned, the Nordic market is of course a significant power market, but it's not bigger than Germany. It's actually a bit smaller than the German power market, but it has 12 bidding zones. So the local, call it local, congestions are very important to incorporate as a part of the modeling. So of course, in our bid 3 model, we have all the details of generation and demand in each of the price areas, and generate a supply and demand curve, so to speak, for each of the market, and generate an hourly price for each market and the hourly flow between the zones. And of course, we model the interconnection capacities between the zones and make assumptions on how that will develop into the future. And as we can see, I guess Kathrine will enlighten us a little bit on how the assumptions on the investments of the Nordic internal grid will affect the prices going into the future. But very important part, and this aspect has growing importance, as Kathrine has already shown. Historically, the price differences in the Nordics, especially or the internal Norway and Sweden zones, has not been very high, but that dynamic has definitely changed in 2020 and might be significant also going forward. And I guess with that glimpse into our modeling, I would leave the word to Kathrine again to give us a little bit of a view into the future.
So thank you, Geir. So yeah, let's turn to what the developments that we've seen in 2020 could mean for the Nordic investment environment going forward. And I think it's 3 questions we need to answer in that respect. One thing is where the long-term power prices are heading. Then what will happen to area prices? Will the differential continue to increase like we've seen, or will they be reduced over time? And then finally, what happens if we get a repeat of the very wet year that we've had this year, or vice versa, a very, very dry year, which also happened in this system. So I think when it comes to the overall price picture, the key message that we want to leave you with is that we do have a positive view on the long-term price developments of the Nordic market. So yes, there may be a couple of rough years ahead, both as the market absorbs the hydro surplus that we are having after this very wet year, and also because there is significant amounts of new generation coming online, both wind and actually nuclear now in 2020, 21 and 22. But in the medium and longer term, we see that there are actually a number of bullish drivers that can push prices up. So from the external to the Nordic drivers, you could see fuel and carbon prices. But we also see electrification and new types of electricity use that after a long period of decline, we are actually now seeing electricity demand increasing quite significantly in the Nordic region. And there are new interconnection being built, which contributes to higher prices as well. And we expect further interconnection to be developed also beyond what we are seeing as being under construction today. And towards the end of the horizon that we're looking at, Swedish and Finnish nuclear is actually reaching its end of its lifetime. And that creates a whole new set of system challenges that I think maybe we should discuss in a different webinar. As this is an open webinar, we are not showing sort of the details of our price forecast, but the dotted line in the graph here is showing the shape of our Nordic curve. And so as you can see, we expect Nordic prices to recover from the current lows that we see and increase in the medium and long term to a level that not only sort of make renewable investments possible, but actually can make them look very interesting. And we don't seem to be alone in thinking that. Even in the current low price environment, we see investment decisions being made. All of these press clippings are from the past couple of months and are made while prices have been really, really, really low. So then, moving on to the price area differences. What are the outlook for those? And I think in order to answer that, we need to consider the location of the new wind that we are expecting to be built and how this correlates with the growth in demand in the same areas and also the development of the grid. And we are in the midst of an investment boom in the Nordics, and there is a large number of projects under construction. So if you look at the figure, you can see total annual generation in 2017, 2022, and 2040. And in 2017, we had about 40 terawatt hours of wind generation in the Nordics, and it was mostly located in the south. And then in the 5 years up to 2022, this is more than doubling to close to 100 terawatt hours. And as you can see, most of that is actually being developed in the north. And if you remember back to one of my earlier graphs, I mentioned a persistent bottleneck between north and south, approximately here. And all of the new wind that is being built to the north of that is actually putting quite a bit of pressure on that bottleneck. So the utilization of that bottleneck in 2022 will be extremely high, and there will be a number of hours where it's really challenging to evacuate the surplus southwards, and that will push prices down very low in those hours in order to actually sort of be able to get it south. And the TSOs are planning to strengthen the north-south transmission grid. But the lead time for transmission projects is really long. So you're talking very often 10, 15 years, and they haven't managed to keep up with this boom in wind investments. So these these capacity reinforcements won't be available in 2022. We are sort of looking towards 25 and 30 and beyond before we're starting to sort of really see some improvements in the capacity along the north-south dimension. But we do expect the Nordics to continue to develop wind also towards 2040, although maybe at a slightly lower pace than before. And we think this is possible through a more balanced development of wind and demand within each of the price areas. And the surplus areas in the north potentially also attracting new power intensive activity. And also, of course, then this gradual development of new grid capacity so that the bottlenecks will slowly ease. And if you look at what this is doing to the price, this graph is showing how the price in each price area deviates from the average price of the Nordic region. And you can see in 2017 the deviations were quite small. The sort of the weak colors indicate relatively small deviations. When we move into 2022, you could see that in that year, price differences are really quite big. We're looking 20 euros per megawatt hour difference between some of the northern price areas and some of the southern ones. So this is actually quite a dramatic development from a Nordic perspective. But then going forward, we do expect these divergence to be reduced somewhat. Denmark, which is a transit area in a way between the hydrologically dominated Nordics and the thermal continent, will have the highest prices, but you can see that within Sweden, Norway, and Finland, the deviations are again much smaller. And you can of course then ask, should we stop investing in the north? Should you avoid investing in the north, given this price picture? And I think our answer would be not necessarily. The north does offer some of the best wind conditions in Europe. And it also has a very interesting pipeline of projects and some of the really largest projects. So you just need to make sure that you understand the locational risk of investing in the Nordics in general, and especially the price and the specific capture ratio of the price area that you're looking at, so that you can weigh the benefits against the risks. Finally, very quick look at what happens in an extreme year. And I think you can do that by looking at the number of weeks in a year that the prices will be either very high or very low. And we define very low prices here as being below 10 euros per megawatt hour and very high prices as being above 50. And you can see that in a normal weather year, so in our average projection, our long-term projection, in 2022, we actually do expect there to be quite a few low-priced weeks, especially in the north, and not that many, or actually no weeks with prices above 50 on average in 2022. In the case of extreme weather, so should 2020 repeat, we actually expect that you will have maybe even a worse situation than you had this year, especially in the north, with more than 40 weeks of prices below 10 euros per megawatt hour. If 2022 turns out to be really dry, prices will increase and be on the high end, and you're actually getting some weeks with prices above 50, even in 2022, so 2 years from now. If we move on to 2040, the situation is much more positive. Of course, we're starting from a higher level. Our 2040 price is higher, but you can see that in the normal weather year, we don't have any low-priced weeks, and we have a number of high-priced weeks, more than 20 weeks with prices above 50 in our sort of long-term projections. And if you then look at a repeat of the really sort of extreme wet weather, the picture is again very different. Yes, you will have some low-priced weeks, but they will in that case be much fewer than what we saw this year. And on the other hand, if 2040 turns out to be really a dry, cold year, basically all the weeks will be above 50. Actually, this is hiding even more positive truth. I think about 20 of those weeks that we're looking at will be about 70 euros per megawatt hour. So yes, a very different picture. So I think the takeaway from this is that 2020 is definitely not the new normal, but there is also a risk that it can be repeated, especially in the short term, if we get another really wet year. in the longer term, the overall price picture is much more robust, and also therefore it's less likely that we will get these long-lasting price collapses that we've seen, even when you have extreme weather years. And we are running, we're getting towards the end, and I'm trying to sum up in some key messages. Yes, 2020 has been extreme. The underlying outlook is a very positive one for the Nordics, but you do need to understand and manage locational risk in order to actually seize the good investment opportunities that are there. We will see price area differences going forward, and especially in the short term, there is a significant downside risk in the wet year, yes, but there is also an increasing upside in the long term, and some really sort of the wet year downside is more than being compensated by some really high prices in the drier years. And then final word, we do very detailed weather, hydro and area price modeling, and believe very firmly that you need to have that in order to be able to sort of properly understand the risks of the Nordics going forward. And I think I will leave you with that and open up for some questions.
Thank you, Kathrine, and thank you, Geir. We've got a few different questions that I will read and let you reply to. We start with a question concerning the hydrology. When do you believe hydro reservoirs will be back to normal levels?
I wish I knew. No, that is as Kathrine showed on a graph earlier. The situation can change pretty rapidly from 1 year to the next, but it's very much depending on, of course, how cold will the winter be, how much snow will there be during the winter, and of course how wet will the next summer be. But sometime during 2021 we would probably see more normal reservoir levels. Absolutely.
Yeah, and as a follow-up question, has the frequency of hydrologically wet years changed, and is the historical weather data we use still relevant for predictions?
It's a very, very interesting question, and it points towards a trend that we have been seeing for a while, coming from climate change, that the Nordic or the precipitation is higher. The wet years are wetter, the normal years are wetter, so we have a trend towards wetter climate in the Nordics, and the frequency of wet years is very difficult to assess. So I don't think anyone knows whether the frequency has changed. You'd need a range of years to actually comment on that, but the trend is definitely going towards wetter years. Absolutely. And as a comment to our modeling, we are in the early years of our predictions, we are using the latest 20 weather years, or very close to the latest ones. So we are capturing the trend in the historical series that we are using, point one. And point two, we are inspired by a publication from the Norwegian regulator NVE. We are doing some adjustments to our future series, so that when we have, like, towards 2040, we have wetter inflow series or precipitation series, and also a little bit of a change between the months. So you would have less snow in the winter and things like that. So the actual month by month distribution of inflow will also change to the hydro system.
Yeah. We have several questions concerning grid congestion and the grid developments. Let me try to summarize that into one. What are the TSOs doing to alleviate the price and differences, and could you elaborate on their future plans? Also, have a view on the interconnection between Sweden and Finland in terms of, say, capacity, timing, and price impact?
Yes, so these price area differences are something that we've been talking about for quite a while, and we see that there is an increasing acceptance in the market for this actually being the development that we see, and we see that the TSOs is also very aware now of this problem. And as I said, there is a number of projects that are aimed at increasing capacity in several places in the system, but maybe especially in the north-south direction. And I won't go into all of them, but we do, in our modeling, we rely quite heavily on the TSO's development plans for the horizon that they are available. But we do use our technical grid expertise. We have a lot of technical grid expertise in AFRY. We use them to help us, understand whether they're realistic, whether they are likely to be delays, and also what is possible and how fast can things happen after or beyond the horizon that we are looking at. So hopefully that answers the question. There's a number of plans, and I won't go into the detail on each of them, I think.
Thank you. Another question that comes up is concerning the demand development, and let me choose one of them. View on the new industry consumption, especially in SE1 and SE2.
As I mentioned, we electrification of industry and new industries using electricity is already included in our projections, and we try as we go forward also to balance so that we think that the low prices that we see in the north will also attract investments from power intensive industries. And there is a number of, for instance, data centers located in the north. We have projects and sort of a hair of people that are considering hydrogen production, for instance, in some of these areas. And I would say that there's actually a significant upside to our projections is that if consumers start to see the price signals that we have in the north, so SE1, SE2 as an example, that can actually attract new investment that would help sort of support the system locally, and therefore also push prices maybe a bit higher than what we have in our projections.
Right. Also, we're pointing to the say locational uncertainty in price developments in different hydrological years going forward. So we have a question about, say, the potential role of, say, price and revenue guarantee structures in the Nordics.
Well, the Nordic markets, and especially Norway and Sweden, hasn't really had subsidy schemes that have given any sort of income guarantee. It's been a green certificate system here. You've had auctions and contracts for differences in Denmark and Finland, but they are also being phased out. So actually, all of the projects in our projections, all the new growth is from projects that are merchant. They are sort of fully exposed to prices in the first place. But we see that the Nordics is probably the most mature and most developed market for PPAs, at least in Europe, and they play a really important role in providing long-term revenue security for wind investments, and therefore also enabling investors to get financing and develop. So there is we do a lot of work in that area as well, and it is as I said, it has been really one of the key drivers into the boom that we're seeing now.
Okay, we are extending, thank you, Kathrine, and thank you, Geir. We're extending our time, scheduled time, so I think we will move on. I'm sure we have more questions, and I'm also sure that our presenters will revert to some of you on in writing on the many, say, interesting questions that have come up. As I said, you will all have a copy emailed to you of the presentation with contact information for Kathrine and Geir. We also have more webinars coming up. The next one that will happen next week on Thursday, the 5th of November at 2 o'clock GMT, 3 o'clock CET, is has a title of Towards 100% Renewable Energy System. We will meet our two experts in the Oxford office, Stephen Woodhouse and Martin Brown. And I think you will now see in the chat box in the webinar, you will see a direct link if you like to sign up also for that webinar. That being said, thank you to all of you for attending the webinar, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon.